Hello, everybody out there, and welcome to our first episode. So, what we're going to do, we would like to address topics that are controversial, maybe, that are timely, and that are important both to African culture and to American culture. And we want to do this as someone who's from an American perspective and somebody who's from an African perspective, but understanding, of course, that we don't speak for everybody in America or everybody in Africa. So maybe, Paul, we can talk a little bit about who we are and maybe why we're interested in this topic, and maybe define a little bit about what we mean by the term wokeness. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this.
Yeah, so my name is Paul Nkata. I am a clinical psychologist. Basically I practice therapy and, support people in rehab as well. And I'm a bit exposed to people of different cultures, working with the refugees as well as people within my country.
And you're based in Entebbe, Uganda.
Exactly.
Just
Just
right.
in
You've
Entebbe, Uganda.
all your life you've lived in Uganda and you're a Ugandan citizen.
Yeah.
And so you've been around Kampala and Entebbe most of your life, that area, or you've been in other parts of Uganda?
Yeah, so basically I'm not born in Entebbe, though I'm staying in Entebbe currently, but I'm born somewhere close to Entebbe in Kampala. But as we work, I found myself working all over the country, so I probably have experience with different cultures within my country, and I've experienced some cultures from foreign land because I've worked with refugees, as well as some different stuff from the western side of the world. Yeah.
Okay.
From my experiences, I have my own opinions about our topic of wokeness.
So I'm an American citizen. I'm from the United States, but I'm currently living in Entebbe, Uganda. I was at one time in a research position at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I recently retired. So last year I retired from that position, but I was involved in science education. I have a PhD in science education, so my expertise is evaluation of math and science, technology, and engineering projects, assessing and evaluating the effectiveness of those programs. I've always kind of taken an interest in, in addressing some of these, hot button topics, but I think while I was in the university, it was kind of risky to talk about or address some of these issues openly and publicly, because people that challenge some of these ideas of wokeness oftentimes find themselves in a little bit of hot water. Sometimes they lose their jobs, and it was just kind of a little risky. But now that I'm retired, I kind of feel a little bit more boldness, I think, to speak up about some of these issues. And maybe perhaps I should have been more bold while I was in my university job. But I will admit I was not as bold as maybe I should have been. But now finding myself retired and maybe with a little bit more freedom to actually express some of the things that I want to talk about, I'm feeling a little bit more like I want to talk about some of these topics. We're talking about wokeness, and maybe a good thing to do would be to define what is wokeness, what do we mean by wokeness, where do we think wokeness has kind of gone off the rails a little bit. So first of all, what do we... you're a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
So you might have a little bit of perspective on what wokeness is.
Oh yeah, so it has been risky, it's actually risky even now, but he felt more risk while he was still employed and working. Well, I feel I'm in the same place, I'm still employed and working somewhere, but I'm taking the risk. I'm more bold.
So he's more bold than me. I wasn't so bold.
Yeah, so anyhow, so
I commend him for that. Yeah.
So basically about wokeness, from the face value of wokeness, for what it should be, it was a good thing. Yeah, it was a good thing because, there are particular cultures or particular people that were, per se, less privileged, or you could say, people say oppressed, and I'm an African, so we went through slave trade. Yeah. We suffered with the colonial rule and all that. So there were bad things that happened, and wokeness was, needed. Because people needed to fight for themselves and, try to free themselves from the shackles of some of those malevolent acts that were happening then. But growing up in school, I always had a question in my head. I'm like, okay, so and are we being so some things can outlive usefulness, so yeah, there's a time when wokeness really was a must, it was inevitable. But then I feel it needs to also be it needs to evolve to where the society is right now, and I feel we're not evolving well. Mm-hmm. Why? Because it's now becoming more toxic. My friend Bobby here is a good man, but when you start saying white supremacy, and then you look at us, me and him, and obviously you think ill of him, but mm-hmm. not all the white people are bad. So yeah. So we're not saying wokeness. I'm not saying wokeness is per se the worst thing that could happen, but I'm more thinking, okay, we can't really regulate how we approach it. So wokeness might be good, but the approach, because we have old problems, but we need to have solutions which are adjusted to the time, and I think we are not doing so well about some of those things. So basically, there's some other controversial topic under wokeness, something like about feminism. So how feminism started, it was inevitable. It was long overdue. It had to happen. But then along the way, the practicality of it in real life is getting off, because people are going away from what feminism should actually be. It's now becoming toxic. Yes, so we have these well-defined, waves of emancipation, waves of fighting for your own rights, and they are well documented, and academically, if you approach them in theory, they are flawless. But then when you approach them, when you examine them in how they are being practiced, they are being malpracticed, and mm-hmm. that's something we feel like we need to talk about, such cases of wokeness, being abused.
Yeah, and I think to add a little bit of my perspective to that, I look at the foundational ideas of wokeness to be solid, because on a foundational level, woke people are concerned with addressing issues of social injustice. And I think where we agree with people who consider themselves to be woke is that there are injustices that have taken place historically that has led to certain groups being in a position where they have to fight a lot harder to overcome, the systems that are in place that might keep them down. But I think where wokeness went wrong is that it started to see everybody in the oppressed class as being a victim, and that you could not escape that oppression unless you tore down the current systems that are in place. And so in order to do that, you have to demonize. It's not enough to acknowledge that racism exists. You have to talk about something called white supremacy culture, and that you're racist by virtue of the fact that you're white.
Which is not fair, really.
Right, right. And then another example would be talking about the oppression of women. We talk about feminism, we talk about women's rights. The whole modern feminist kind of philosophy which is kind of the woke kind of philosophy or agenda, is that it's not enough to talk about an environment where women can have equal opportunities, but it's rather what we have to do is we have to confront the patriarchy, that this system that has been built for men is oppressing women and keeping women from rising up to kind of the same positions of influence and power as men. And so we have to tear down that system. The system itself is bad, and you even get some extremes to the point where all men are misogynist just by virtue of the fact that they're men. It starts out being something legitimate. Let's address some of these injustice issues. But then it turns into something instead of the entire system is bad. You're a racist by virtue of the fact that you're white, or you're a misogynist by virtue of the fact that you're a man. And that's kind of where I think woke culture has gone wrong. And there are people who are watching this who will object, and they will say, well, no, that's not what wokeness is about. That's not what we say. And while it might not be officially part of your doctrine or your ideology or your philosophy, that might not be how you describe it on paper. it is unfortunately often the way that it gets practiced. It's turned into something bad, but it's almost turned into something cult-like, where if you even challenge their agendas, you're racist, you're misogynistic, you're homophobic, you're whatever label they want to throw on you, where they shut down dialogue by, just calling you a name. And so this is also kind of a concern and a problem that I have, that oftentimes people who subscribe to these perspectives don't want dialogue, they don't want discussion. The moment that they're challenged, they respond just by calling you a name. You're transphobic, you're homophobic, you're racist, you're sexist, misogynistic, whatever term they want to throw out at you in that particular moment.
I don't think it's right, because I feel if I'm having my objective opinion about, let's say, racism as a black man, I feel I have a right to choose what side of the coin I'm supporting or rooting for. Because, in our fight against racism, essentially, some blacks have also become racist, It's not like a black person cannot be racist to a white.
But sometimes the people on the woke camp will say that a black person can't be racist,
Exactly.
that only a white person can be racist, and that's just not true.
It's not true. So we're having a hateful culture where it's easy to call a man a misogynist, but usually the woman calling a man a misogynist is usually you find them also misandrists. Because there's a lot of hate for men, let's say on social media, all over the place. And, we don't throw around these words calling them misandrists or whatever, but essentially, some of these people qualify to be misandrists. So we don't solve one problem by bringing another, We don't deal with misogynists by creating misandrists. It's not helping. So in the end, we're going to have a demonized culture where we're being hateful to each other. I think it's counterproductive. So we probably want to find ways of dealing with the earlier evils that are more ingenious and are more helpful to the progression of humanity. Otherwise, we're just making things worse by trying to help in an unproductive way.
So as I said earlier, this is our first episode. We wanted to use this first episode here to kind of introduce ourselves. But maybe before we go, we can talk about some of the topics, maybe list some of the topics that we intend on discussing.
Yeah, so
maybe if you're out there and you want to suggest some topics to add to this, feel free to put something in the comments about what you want us to discuss.
Yeah, so topics around gender. Gender is very broad. We might have the masculine image or the feminine image, or sexuality and basically sex. There's the political field is very contentious. I'm not American, but I know there are two sides in America, Republicans and Democrats.
You can even go deeper than that and say that there's the establishment politicians and the kind of revolt against the establishment. You've got Donald Trump, and they kind of go against the establishments. So it depends how you look at it. You've got the right and the left, but you've also got the establishment versus the revolt against the establishment. But
yeah, so basically things. We have a plethora of topics like there's abortions. It's a bit contentious. Marriage and divorce. Things are really changing.
Traditional values kind of versus
basically traditional and the conventional values, or And then there's another thing I feel I want to talk about again: freedoms. I feel the freedoms are becoming a problem, and I think that's a big deal, especially if you're talking about wokeness. We are creating so many freedoms, which freedoms are trampling on other people's free will. Or we have people living plastic lives because, Paul, I have a freedom to call myself whatever I want to call myself. And, if you don't call me that, you offend me or, against me. So
right. If I identify as something, but that something is not consistent with objective reality, do I have the right to compel you to call me what I identify as, even if it contradicts reality?
And there's a video I was watching, it's more of a meme, and this guy says, so from now on, I'm transparent. You should call me transparent. If you don't call me transparent, you're offending me. And come on, I can see you. So but that was a joke. But that's
it's a joke, but
things are turning out anyway. So
So, all right. So that's what we're going to be doing. I don't know if you have anything to add before we end this video. We just basically welcoming people who feel like they're like-minded, because I feel we're being suffocated. We can't speak about things that we want to speak about, and we feel
we're caged in a way behind shackles. So it's a bit like we want to create a platform where people can actually feel liberated to speak. Hopefully we don't get banned because, you know.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we'll be back in about a week, hopefully. That's our
Hopefully, big hopefully.
big hopefully we'll be back in
Yeah.
a week. If there's anything that you would like us to talk about that we haven't identified as part of the potential topics, please put them in the comments and we'll add them to our list.
Sure.
So yeah. So all right, then we'll see you
Ciao.
next week. Ciao. Thank you. Bye for now, as I always like to say.